like having served in those different positions and being a master tech, as you have said, you could probably tell us what are some common myths about vehicle maintenance?
I think the most common myth that we see today, and this is also one of the most costly things that we see today, is someone that attempts to fix their own car or do their own repair. And what they typically, the first thing that happens is you have a check engine light that comes on in the car. Sometimes it's running rough, sometimes it's running just fine, and you're not sure what the check engine light is, so you stop by the auto parts store and they go out and they read the code for you. And then they read the code for you, and once that's done, then they sell you a part. And then you go home, you put the part in the car, and go out and you drive the car again, and the check engine light's still on. That's probably the thing that we see the most. Reading an engine fault code is not the same thing as a diagnostic. All a fault code does is it tells you what area of the car has failed. It doesn't tell you why it's failed. For example, you could have a code in it for an oxygen sensor. Well, when this is what we see often is that there's a code in it for an oxygen sensor. The customer goes out and buys themselves an oxygen sensor, goes home and spends 4 or 5 hours putting it in, goes out and drives the car, and the light's still on. And then they take it back to the parts store, and then they hook it back up to their code reader, and the code reader says that you have a code for an oxygen sensor. And then they're not understanding why it's still there because they've already replaced the part. And that's usually where we come in. The vehicle, at that point in time, they've decided that we need to get the vehicle looked at by a technician. And so they bring the vehicle in, and then we run a diagnostic on it. Now, a diagnostic means lots of things. Primarily what a diagnostic is it's the time that it takes for an automotive technician to properly diagnose the car. And sometimes that requires tools, individual testing tools, digital volt ohm meters. Sometimes it requires laptops, emissions gas analyzers, data, and a whole lot of experience. And what we'll find is typically on the oxygen sensor one is the oxygen sensor was completely fine. What was really going on was the mass airflow sensor wasn't reading correctly, so it was setting a incorrect air-fuel mixture to the car, and the oxygen sensor knows that that's not the correct mixture for the car, so it sets a code. So in all actuality, the oxygen sensor was working fine. The real problem was the mass airflow sensor, but the way a lot of vehicles work is just because the part is bad doesn't mean it's gonna set a fault code. Some do, some don't. It's a big tree of processes that you have to follow each branch and see where it ends up. And then when you've done that, then you're able to go back and you're able to look at the car and look at the car's data and interpret the data and decide that this is a correct course that we should take. Another example would be you'll have poor gas mileage. You'll set oxygen sensor codes. You may set engine knock sensor codes, and all of those components are fine. What's really wrong with the car is the car had a bad thermostat, and the car wasn't getting warm enough to operate within the correct parameters. And so that was setting off a check engine light for one of the other components that was reading the vehicle's output of data and knowing that data is not correct. So it doesn't tell you why. It just gives you the engine fault code gives you a direction to go. It gives you a place to start. It's definitely not the finishing point.